One of my first jobs after college was as a truck driver making long-distance deliveries. The pay was pretty good, but the long-distance driving could get kind of grueling. On this one occasion, I was making a delivery during a really stormy evening. The rain was relentless, and it made driving a challenge. So when I saw a sign for a gas station, I decided to turn in, grab a snack, and let the worst of the storm pass. The gas station looked pretty run down with rusty pumps and flickering floodlights. There was only one other car there. I asked the woman who was grabbing some snacks off the shelf. She said to me, "Don't judge me. I have a long drive all by myself." I just smiled awkwardly at her, but as I left, some of her words replayed in my head. She'd said she's got a lonely drive by herself ahead of her. Maybe there was nothing in it, and she just phrased her words wrong. But I don't know. I just had this nagging I couldn't see anyone in there. Either that guy had left or he was hiding in the back seat. I waited there underneath the awning when she came out with an armful of snag. I smiled and said, "Your son will enjoy eating all that." She seemed confused and replied, "I don't have a son." I told her I didn't want to alarm her, and I saw a teenage boy get into the back of her car. I saw the utter horror in this woman's eyes, and I knew instantly that she'd been traveling alone, and whoever that was in the back of her car, he shouldn't turn off. And in the dim light, I saw the car's door swing open, and that guy darted out of there, staring at me with a look of pure hatred. Then, with his one hand still hidden beneath his jacket, he ran off back towards the darkness of the trees. Soon after that, the overhead lights turned back on, and the gas station attendant came over and acted concerned. He seemed pretty shady, and I was sure that he was involved in this somehow. The woman was terrified, and I could see her visibly shaking. So I checked her car for her and then agreed to follow her in my truck to the next rest stop. I had to get back to my deliveries, so I gave her my contact info in case she needed to pass them on to the police. I never heard from her or from the police. I don't know if she ever reported the incident. All I do know is that if I hadn't decided to stop at that gas station, that woman would have driven off with that guy hiding in the back seat. Just thinking about it gives me the chills. Every summer, I take a 10-hour road trip to Rhode Island to stay at my family's beach house. The long drives had dragged, and in previous years, I've always had someone with me, so we could take turns driving and keep each other company. Change of circumstances this year meant I had to drive alone. I made sure I had a full tank of gas and plenty of black coffee. I was halfway through my journey listening to an audiobook and just driving when I saw a roadblock up ahead. A police officer waved me down. He told me there'd been an accident up ahead and that the road was temporarily closed. He then told me I'd have to take a detour and gave me directions for the new route. This caused me to panic a bit. I'm one of those people who doesn't like my plans being thrown off. Worse still, his directions diverted me to an off-the-grid utility road that had no cell signal. I had no choice but to keep following the road and pray I was going the right way. About 20 minutes passed, and I hadn't seen another vehicle or even a house. I was in the middle of nowhere, no clue as to where I was. I regretted drinking all that coffee, and when I ended up needing a bathroom break, I had no choice but to park my car on the side of the road and go behind some bushes. As I was returning to my car, I heard a motorcycle approaching. I stayed back and waited for it to pass, only it didn't pass. Instead, it stops next to my car. There were two men on the motorcycle, and the back passenger jumped off and started staring through my car window. At this point, I just thought maybe he was checking to see that the driver was in trouble. I walked over to him and said that it was my car. I thought this would be it, and they'd ride off, but instead he gave this muffled laugh from beneath his helmet. Then he opened my car door and stuck his head inside. I had my keys in my pocket, but I didn't lock it behind me. I tried to hide my panic and calmly told them I needed to get going. He blocked me from getting into my car, and with a smirk told me that I had to prove this really was my car. I replied that it was obviously my car, since there was no one else around for miles. As soon as I said that, I regretted it. I felt so powerless and afraid. Then he lunged forward and wrapped his arms around my arms and waist, trapping me there. I screamed and tried to wiggle free, but it was no use. I saw his sleeve was rolled up, and I noticed on his wrist was a strange tattoo of a triangle with 4 horizontal lines through it. Then, in his strangely calm voice, the other man asked, "Do you know where the end is?" I shook my head and begged them to let me go, but he just said, "We must find the end." I cried out that I didn't know where it was, but they didn't listen to me. Then, all of a sudden, my car's GPS signal started up and started displaying directions, and my phone started buzzing with text messages. The man on the back scratched his wrist, and I saw that he had the same triangular line tattoo as the first man. He snapped his fingers, and his friend immediately let go of me, and he jumped back onto the bike. Before they left, the passenger showed me his tattooed wrist and said, "See you at the end." I watched them speed off, and I stayed there, shaken up and stunned by what had just happened. I knew I needed to get far away from there in case they came back, so I managed to calm myself enough to drive away. I didn't tell anyone about what had happened. I was worried that no one would take me seriously. I'll never know why they acted the way they did, or what would have happened if my GPS and phone hadn't turned on. I'm often haunted by the memory of that strange symbol and the meaning of the words, "See you at the end." This happened last spring. My mom called me late one evening to strut, saying they just rushed my dad to the hospital. There was no doubt in my mind I needed to be there with him. So I shoved some overnight clothes and essentials into my backpack and hit the road. I was desperate to get there without stopping, but it was an 8-hour trip. So about 5 hours into it, I felt my eyelids getting really heavy. I turned up the radio to help me stay awake, but when I felt my eyes closing again, I knew I had to stop. I parked and checked to see that my door was locked. I was on a quiet road surrounded by dense trees, and even though I hadn't passed another vehicle for a while, this place was pretty creepy. I set my alarm to go off in an hour at 3:45 a.m., then flung my jacket over me and fell asleep. I was awakened by a tapping sound on the car window, and in my groggy state, it took me a few seconds to figure out what it was. I pulled the jacket off my face and peered at the window. A woman was standing there in the dead of night, tapping on the glass. My heart started pounding and I didn't know what to do. I was in the middle of nowhere and couldn't see any cars around, so I didn't know how this woman could be out here at this time. When she saw me looking at her, she didn't change her reaction and just continued tapping on the glass. I couldn't just drive off and ignore her, so despite how unsettling this felt, I turned the engine on, lowered the window about a quarter of the way. She stopped tapping and crouched down and peered through the window with this creepy smile. I asked her if there was a problem. She nodded her head. I asked her if she wanted me to call someone for her, and she shook her head and then started tapping on the glass again. My phone alarm went off, and I reached over to the passenger seat to switch it off. As I did this, out of the corner of my eye, I saw the woman wave her hand. Suddenly, this man burst out from behind the trees and charged at my car. I heard a smashing sound and saw the shattered glass all over the passenger side. This man had broken the window and was reaching inside my car trying to grab at me. I tried to squirm out of his way, but I felt a tug in my hair. The woman had stuck her hand through the partly open window and had a hold of me. I was kicking out at the man, but also trying to pull myself free of the woman's grip. It was a nightmare. Then I managed to press the window button to go up. As it rose, she let go of me and tried to jerk her hand away, but she was too slow, and 2 of her fingers were trapped between the window and the door. She let out this painful wail and furiously tried to wiggle them free. The man stopped trying to grab me and pulled back. I saw him walk in front of my car and head over to the woman. He pulled something out of his pocket and lowered it to her fingers. I heard this horrible slicing sound and realized it was a knife. He was slicing through the woman's trapped fingers. I put one hand on the wheel and got ready to floor it, and then opened the window just enough for it to free her fingers before I drove away. I was so disturbed by it all that I made the rest of the journey without stopping. It was only when I reached my destination that I allowed myself to let what actually happened sink in. I didn't want to tell my mom about it. She had enough worries. So I went over to my uncle's house instead. In the morning, I could see the mess they'd made to my car and to me. I had cuts on my arm from the broken glass that I'd been too adrenaline fueled to notice. There was blood dripping down the driver's side window and lumps of stuck-on flesh. My uncle called the police for me, and they said they'd investigate further. They haven't had any leads, so those people are probably still out there roaming, doing who knows what. I don't drive at night anymore, and I never will again. I'll always make the trip home in the daytime, always. I don't want to think about what could have happened to me if I hadn't reacted quickly and managed to get away from them.